Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I'm just sitting here drinking my morning coffee, getting ready to start my day. And today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about bench press, assistance, and accessory work. This is a topic that's pretty heavily overdone, but what people need to remember when we're talking about this, most of the information out there, articles, videos, everything else, probably 90 to 95% of them are for equipped powerlifting. This information is usually for people who are bench pressing with a bench shirt, not for raw bench pressing. And that's because for a couple decades, equipped powerlifting dominated the powerlifting world. And therefore, all of the information that was put out for 2 decades about the squat, bench, and deadlift were for people who were lifting equipped. And therefore, it's carried over, and tons of raw people try to implement the same stuff. And then you've got coaches out there who are legitimately insanely strong raw lifters like Dan Green, Paul Carter, etc. Guys like that who try to undo some of that, who've tried to discuss, look, we need specific training for raw lifting. And that applies to all of you out there who are just trying to get strong at the gym, those of you who are just trying to gain strength and muscle. The same stuff applies to you. I mean, for most of you guys out there, if you can get your bench up over 300 or even to 350, even natty, you're going to have pretty decent sized chest and triceps, right? Totally going to improve what you're trying to do, even for you guys who are just chasing size more than anything else. So it's important that we think about it in these terms. And for you guys, the same thing. If you're going to bench press raw, which you are, if you're just training for hypertrophy, then this applies to you. So assistance work and accessory work. Well, first we need to make the first thing clear. Specificity of training is key. Assistance and accessory work are just that. They are never, ever, with a few exceptions, going to be the primary builder of your strength. I know there are people who believe the opposite, but that's coming back to a West Side equipped mindset, and these people are not successful because they've done that. They're successful in spite of that. They're successful because they at least trained the main lifts and they've gained a ton of muscle, usually with the help of a lot of drugs, right? That's usually the case. You very, very rarely see guys who are moderate or low dose anabolic users who get away with doing 70, 80, 90% accessory lifts and still having amazing lifts on the big three. It's actually rare. It's really hard to do for guys who are totally clean. Works a lot better for guys on a ton of gear. Now, that being said, bench press, you need to do tons and tons and tons of pause benching, right? That's what you need to do. And the only key I would give there is that build your strength using a narrower grip, either a closed grip or a medium grip. Why? Because you can do more volume. Because that's usually the biggest problem with the big lifts, is that you struggle to do enough volume with them to get the training effect you want without sometimes beating up your joints, without having problems, without having recovery issues. But a slightly narrower grip is dramatically easier on your shoulders. You have to train slightly lighter, therefore you can recover a little bit better. That's almost the purpose of assistance work, right? It's almost the purpose. So keep that in mind. Tons of narrow grip, or closed grip or medium grip pause benching. As much volume of it as you can recover from. That's your first key. So before you even discuss accessory or assistance work, we need to bring home specificity is king. Always has been, always will be. Now, as far as assistance work, well, what's an assistance exercise? Assistance exercises for raw lifters are not the same concept as equipped lifters. Equipped lifters, it's always, oh, what can I do with bands, chains, partials, things like that, so you can lift a heavier weight, right? Why would we do assistance work like that? We wouldn't do that for a raw lifter, because that stuff doesn't carry over. In other words, if you spent a month doing nothing but that stuff, instead of the primary lift, and you got a lot stronger on your chain work, your board presses, whatever, and you went back to flat benching, usually your bench will have gone down. You'll have lost strength in spite of that, right? It doesn't carry over. It doesn't carry over. So we need to be thinking in terms of assistance work is there for either a novel training response or to let us slightly reduce the load, right? We're forced to use a lighter weight so we can, again, add more volume to our training and recover from it. So in light of that, people would say, well, does it matter what assistance work I do? No, it actually doesn't matter. Anyone who says that any exercise is the best assistance exercise is full of shit. They are full of shit, because that's not how it works. All accessory exercises do is let you maintain a similar bar path and motor pattern to the primary lift, but give you a novel training response and a slightly lighter weight. It almost doesn't matter what you do. Now, I'll make a recommendation. In spite of that, I would say, you know what, probably the only assistance exercise most of you would ever need is the floor press. Now, people will say, but Jason, isn't that a partial? Yeah, if you're tiny. But here's my question. If you have a tiny chest and back still to where you can't get the bar at least within a couple inches of your chest, if not touch your chest, because I can touch my chest on a floor press. The bar touches my chest when my arms touch the floor. Not a problem for me. But if you can't get within a couple inches of that, then you don't need assistance work. You need to do more benching and you need to keep building your back. That's what you need to do. You don't need assistance work. Assistance work is never necessary for novice lifters. For you guys who are barely hitting 225 for a couple pause reps on the flat bench, you have no business doing assistance work. It's a waste of your time. You're going to make slower gains on adding to your bench. Build a base with the bench. Now you can do some accessory work, because accessory work builds up weak links all around. It builds support musculature. That's different. We'll get to that in a minute. But for assistance work, the reason I like the floor press, it's extremely close. All it does is that it's a stricter version of the bench press. You can't use leg drive, and it forces you to lift from a dead stop. That carries over very well to your pause bench. And it's not going to be the middle of the bench if you put on enough size. If you're thick enough to get it close to the chest, it's going to be pretty much helping you come from a dead stop really close to the chest. And because you're forced to go lighter, you're going to recover easier, and it's extremely close in terms of technique and bar path. Therefore, it's going to have fantastic carryover. And it eliminates the novice. That's a beautiful thing too. In other words, it's an assistance exercise that really is only particularly useful for the advanced lifter, because you have to have a certain amount of size to get the best carryover from it. Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, and that's almost what I would say is a litmus test for someone who says, do I need assistance work on my bench? Well, have you put on enough meat on your body that you can get within a couple, 2 to 3 inches of your chest on a floor press? That's a good litmus test. That's why I like the floor press for that. Is it any better than a Spoto press or anything else? Probably not. It's just assistance work. It's just there to give you a novel training response, and you shouldn't need to get that novel training response very often, because usually your first thing you would change would be minor changes in grip width. That'll give you a novel training response, and that's assistance work. So that's up front. Accessory work. I'm going to say the only two things you really need to be thinking of in terms on the bench press, unless you just think you need more tricep, but you could do some tricep work, nothing wrong with that. Bigger triceps certainly won't hurt your bench press. But I would say your focus needs to be on overhead pressing. When I say overhead pressing, I mean the standing press, because it doesn't beat up your rotator cuffs and doesn't destroy your shoulders and cause impingement like those seated ones do, because with the overhead press, you have the ability to move the torso. You can lay back at the bottom, and you can push through at the top. And if you're up against the bench, you're going to tend to impinge your shoulders at the top. I don't recommend you do them seated ever. Leave that to dumbass bodybuilders. They're all going to need their shoulders scoped anyways one day. That doesn't need to be you. The standing barbell press to help build the entire shoulder girdle and additional tricep development that will carry over to your bench press. It'll carry over to your bench press very, very well, and it may not give you much extra strength on the bench. But what we're looking at for accessory work for the bench press, you're going to build your bench doing bench pressing anyways. This stuff is here to give you a better support musculature so that you have a more stable platform to press from, right? That's what we really are thinking of in terms on the bench press. You can build a monstrous bench doing nothing but bench press every day, day after day. You can. Anyone who tells you otherwise is full of it. You absolutely can. Problem is you're eventually going to get hurt if you're not careful. And injuries will slow down your bench gains faster than anything. So the standing press is probably your number one go-to for just stabilizing your entire shoulder girdle. It will also help build up the triceps, the delts, and the upper chest to some extent. And then behind that, I'm going to say tons of upper and middle back work. What do I mean by that? I mean pen lay rows, weighted pull-ups, weighted chin-ups, or even body weight pull-ups and chin-ups if you're doing them from a dead hang. And here's going to be where it's going to carry over best. I'd say in terms of just doing the reverse of the bar path and stronger rear delts, probably the pen lay row is going to be better, right? It's going to be better there because, again, it's replicating a similar bar path. You're getting used to gripping a bar. It's going to be very similar to your medium or narrow grip bench press in terms of the actual movement pattern just being a reverse of it almost. You're going to hit a similar spot on the chest, and it builds the rear delts well. But the weighted pull-up and the weighted chin-up also have their advantages. They have advantages because they have a secondary emphasis on building your upper chest, the long head of the tricep. These are secondary heads of the primary movers that come into play on the bench press that maybe don't get worked enough on the bench press. So even though we could argue the pendlay row might in certain ways have certain specificity carryover better and maybe a little more rear delt, pull-ups and chin-ups, particularly done from a dead hang, have their own unique merits that I think do give a little bit of performance carryover directly to your bench press. And that's mainly because they put a lot of secondary emphasis. And me personally, I get an actual pump in my upper chest from doing my dead hang pull-ups, right? You're going to help develop those weaker heads of the primary movers on the bench press. And that's not a bad thing either. So honestly, I would say all three of those have their merit. As far as your accessory work goes for your bench press, you need to pick at least one of them and get really, really strong on it. And that will also help stabilize your bench press, build a bigger back. It'll give you a better platform to press from and a more stable platform to press from. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.